You're here in the faint gold light of an Egyptian morning, somewhere along the Nile where the river moves so slowly you suspect it's in on the whole ancient thing. The air is warm, but not yet heavy, and the sun still low paints every wall, basket, and stray chicken with a honey glow. You're in a small village that's been here for centuries, and if you listen closely, you can hear the first clinks of pottery from a bakery 2 streets over. It's the kind of sound that tells you bread is coming, and therefore, life is continuing. Welcome. You've arrived in an Egypt that smells like baking grain and palm fronds, with a side of dust and optimism. There's no dramatic parade or pharaoh waiting for you. Just everyday people, many of whom have probably already been awake for hours. If you think you'll get through this day without a nap, you are overestimating both your stamina and ancient Egyptian climate control. Before we step into the bakery, let me gently remind you, this channel is meant for slow nights and heavy eyelids. If you find yourself drifting off, that's not a problem, it's a feature. So, if you enjoy this little journey, consider pressing that like button. And if you'd like to keep wandering through dusty streets and oddly fragrant kitchens in the future, subscribing will mean you don't miss the next one. Oh, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always oddly comforting to imagine people listening in dozens of different hours at once. Now let's ease into tonight's journey. You walk down the narrow street toward the bakery. The walls lean in toward each other, throwing shade on the road like they're conspiring to protect you from the sun. The dirt beneath your sandals is warm already, though it's still morning. You pass a boy carrying 2 jars of beer, mild, ancient beer that tastes more like liquid bread than the modern kind. He nods politely, his eyes already on the bread. Cue ahead. The bakery is open-fronted, the scent tumbling out like a story you can't help but follow. Inside, a man in a linen kilt is kneading dough on a low table. He works it with a steady rhythm, his hands pressing, folding, pressing again. You notice something odd. Beside the table, there's a small bowl of oil infused with herbs and something sweet. Every so often, he dips his fingers into it, then continues kneading. The scent isn't just from the bread. It's floral. That's when you remember the curious detail we came here for: perfume in bread. Ancient Egyptians didn't do this. For Instagram-worthy brunches, obviously, though you suspect some modern influencer would have killed for the aesthetic. The scented oils were partly for flavor, partly for health, and depending on who you asked, partly for the favor of the Tiver of the gods. Some scholars think certain oils masked the scent of grain that had been stored just a little too long. Others think it was a way to impress wealthier customers who wanted even their bread to smell expensive. Historians still debate Whether perfume in bread was an everyday treat or something reserved for festivals and temple offerings. Today, watching the baker work, you can tell he's done this so many times. The scented step feels as natural as breathing. You take a seat on a worn stone by the doorway. Outside, a stray cat curls in the shade. Inside, the baker hums under his breath, a tune that's probably older than the walls. The air is thick with flour dust and that strange floral warmth, and already you feel your shoulders relaxing. You're in no hurry. This is Egypt, and the bread will take as long as it takes. By mid-morning, the bakery is alive with a kind of slow bustle, the sort where nobody rushes, yet somehow everything gets done. Women arrive with baskets balanced on their heads, carrying grain from their households to be milled here. You watch as a boy barely taller than the grinding stone pours barley into the mill, his arms dusted white with flour. The heavy stone wheel turns with a deep, comforting scrape, pushed in slow circles by another worker. The baker greets each customer by name, and you realize this is less of a shop and more of a community center with bread as its excuse. People lean in to share gossip over the counter, their voices low but animated. You catch words about the river flooding, about a missing goat, about someone's cousin who's been seen at the docks far too often for anyone's liking. You notice the perfumed oil again. Today's blend, the baker explains, is made with crushed coriander, fenugreek, and something called lotus resin. You smell it, and it's oddly soothing, like a flower that isn't trying too hard to be liked. He says the recipe came from his father, who got it from his father, which makes it at least 100 years old. In Egyptian terms, that's practically yesterday. Of course, there's another side to it. A woman waiting in line tells you that. The temple priests sometimes commission special loaves with even rarer oils, blue lotus, if they can get it, which are burned as offerings to Hathor or Osiris. The scent, she says, carries prayers upward in the smoke. Whether that's the god's favorite delivery method or just a human superstition, no one really knows. Historians still argue about whether such perfumed bread was primarily religious or just a fancy culinary trend. You suppose it could be both. After all, humans have always found ways to make sacred things smell delicious. From your spot near the doorway, you can see into the back room where the bread is baked. The oven, a massive clay dome, glows faintly from within. Someone is sliding flattened rounds of dough inside with a long paddle. The heat shimmers the air like a mirage, and you think about how this same process has been repeated in this very spot for generations. The cat you saw earlier wanders in, tail curling lazily. It sits under your bench as if you've been friends for years. You give it a small crumb from the baker's counter, and it looks at you with the mild gratitude of a creature who knows it owns the place. There's a calm satisfaction in this room. The rhythm of kneading, the steady murmur of conversation, the warm smell of baking, it's all a gentle reminder that daily life, even thousands of years ago, had its own soft luxuries. They just happened to come with a side of coriander oil and the occasional cat hair in the loaf dot, and you somehow feel like you've been here forever. The first batch of bread comes out of the oven with a hiss of steam, and the baker's apprentice moves quickly, though never hurried, to stack the warm, flat rounds on a reed mat. You can see the faint sheen of oil glistening on their crust, catching the light like a well-polished bronze mirror. You're close enough to smell the mingling scents, baked grain, the soft spice of coriander, and that faint lotus sweetness that lingers in the air like the memory of a festival. You reach for one, but the baker smiles and shakes his head, not yet. In this place, bread is communal, and everyone waits until the full batch is ready. You don't mind. It gives you a chance to watch the rest of the village drift in. There's an old fisherman who leans on the door frame, his face like weathered. Papyrus, telling the baker that the fish are lazy today, just like my son. You stifle a laugh and hope his son isn't within earshot. Across the room, a girl is delivering a jar of fresh date syrup. She explains that some customers like to dip their bread in it while it's still warm. You imagine the taste sweet. Perfumed bread dipped in dark syrup, and your stomach politely informs you it would like to participate in this tradition immediately. As you sit there, you realize this bakery is more than a place of food. It's the village's social network. Everyone here knows who's sick, who's traveling, and who's been seen whispering too much with someone else's cousin. It's as if the scent of perfumed bread draws in not just people, but the very news of the town. One man in line mentions that during certain festivals, the bakers produce loaves so heavily scented with herbs that you can smell them halfway to the temple. He claims it's not just for the gods, it keeps the flies away. This may or may not be a scientific fact, but you find it oddly believable. Historians, of course, have no way to verify whether ancient flies had refined olfactory tastes. The baker finally nods toward you, and you take your first bite. The crust is soft yet sturdy, the flavor familiar and strange at the same time, like a memory you never actually had. The oil gives it an earthy, sweet perfume that lingers, subtle but insistent. You chew slowly, mostly because you don't want it to end. Outside, you can hear the faint bray of a donkey, the call of a vendor selling onions, and the deep, patient breathing of the Nile. Somewhere beyond the houses, the river glitters under the sun like a strip of glass. And here, in this bakery, time feels just as still. You think about how many mornings like this have happened here. How many loaves have carried whispers of perfume into the mouths of people who never imagined their breakfast would still be discussed. Thousands of years later, after the morning crowd disperses, the bakery quiets. The baker leans against the counter, wiping flour from his hands, while the apprentice sits cross-legged on the floor shaping small rolls for the afternoon. You step outside, blinking at the brightness, and feel the dry warmth settle on your skin. The street smells faintly of bread even here. You pass a pottery workshop where two men are shaping jars, not for oil or wine, but for storing grain. One of them, with a grin, tells you they're making a special order for a wealthy household that insists on keeping their flour in scented clay containers. So the bread, he says, will smell fine before it even meets the baker. It sounds excessive, but you can't help admiring the commitment to the bit. Farther along, you notice a scribe sitting under the shade of a fig tree, writing on a sheet of papyrus. He's recording orders for the next temple festival, which will apparently require bread shaped like lotus flowers. He explains that some shapes are symbolic: lotus for rebirth, fish for fertility, and, oddly enough, ducks for prosperity. You wonder whether anyone has ever looked at a duck and thought, yes, that's wealth right there. The air grows warmer, and you find yourself slowing your steps. You pass an elderly woman sprinkling herbs into a jar of oil. She tells you she learned from her mother which blends work best for bread. Today she's mixing myrrh and cinnamon, but she lowers her voice and says, "For the priests, I use something else, a secret." You nod solemnly, as if entrusted with a matter of national importance. Historians still debate whether these herbal blends were standard recipes or deeply personal creations passed through families. Some suspect they were like family heirlooms, guarded more carefully than jewelry. The street eventually loops you back toward the bakery. Remember the cat from earlier? It's there again, sprawled across the doorway, as if to suggest that this is now your assigned seating area. You sit, partly for the shade, partly because you don't have anywhere else to be. The baker brings you a small roll still warm and a jar of beer bread drink. The beer tastes earthy, almost sour, with a faint sweetness. It's not meant for drunkenness, but for nourishment, thick enough that you could almost chew it. The roll is scented with the same lotus oil as before, but in smaller measure, letting the grain speak for itself. Somewhere nearby, a child laughs. A jar clinks against stone, and the wind shifts just enough to carry the faint scent of baking again. You feel the slow rhythm of the place settling into you, the way the Nile itself must settle into its banks after a long journey. You could stay here all day, and perhaps in this story you will. The afternoon in the village moves like a drowsy boat on the Nile, steady, unhurried, and entirely uninterested in your modern sense of productivity. The bakery has shifted into its second wind. The morning crowd is gone. but a quieter, more deliberate set of visitors takes their place. These are the people who plan ahead, scribes who want bread for tomorrow's work, fishermen's wives, preparing for an early departure, and one or two temple servants who arrive with empty baskets and leave with loaves stacked like small sandstone bricks. You sit on your usual stone seat, a position you've somehow claimed as though you've been doing this for years. The cat has accepted your presence and now uses you as partial shade. Across the street, a man sells onions in neat piles, each bundle tied with a strip of papyrus. You realize they're almost too beautiful to eat, like little vegetable sculptures, but then you remember that here, even the bread is dressed up. The baker is working with a new oil blend, today cinnamon leaf, crushed mint, and a faint hint of rose. He dips his fingers into it as naturally as someone adding water to a plant. You watch him knead, and it strikes you how much of baking here is about touch. No measurements, no timers, just the baker's hands and a lifetime of knowing when dough feels right. A customer mentions in a half-whisper that a neighboring village recently tried to copy this bakery's recipes, but without the perfume. They say it's faster, she mutters, but their bread tastes lonely. You try to imagine what lonely bread would taste like, but decide it's probably just bread without the magic. Historians still can't say with certainty when or why scented oils first made their way into dough, though some think it began as an offering to the gods, only later drifting into everyday use. Whatever the origin, you can see that here it's as essential as the flour itself. The air grows heavier as the sun leans west. A boy runs past carrying a small papyrus-wrapped bundle, most likely bread ordered for someone who doesn't want to stand in the afternoon heat. You sip from a clay cup of cool water offered by the apprentice. The cup smells faintly of the grain it once stored, as though it remembers its previous life. Outside, the slow hum of conversation continues. Nothing urgent, nothing loud, just the comfortable, low-level chatter of people who've known each other forever. It's the kind of background noise that could lull you to sleep, if the cat weren't already there beating you to it. Later, you find yourself wandering toward the edge of the village, following the scent of something baking that isn't bread. The smell is richer, almost nutty, and it leads you to a small outdoor hearth where two women are making what looks like flat cakes. They explain these are festival breads, denser, sweeter, and brushed with an even more potent oil mixture, sesame, honey, and ground dates. They're baking them ahead of a minor temple celebration, and each loaf will be offered before the gods, before being eaten by the celebrants. One of the women laughs when you ask why perfume is added to bread for the gods. Because the gods have noses too, she says, as though it's the most obvious answer in the world. You can't really argue with that. Nearby, A young boy is grinding lotus petals with a stone pestle. He says it's for a special bread order placed by the scribe you saw earlier. Apparently, he's preparing a scroll for a merchant who believes that eating lotus bread before a journey ensures safe passage. Historians still debate whether this belief had any real religious foundation or whether it was simply an early example of what you might call edible insurance. The breeze from the river reaches you here, bringing with it the sound of distant splashing. You can almost see the line of boats moored along the bank, their sails tied down, their hulls creaking softly. You think about how the same wind that moves the riverboats now carries the scent of sesame bread across the village. It feels like a connection between water, air, and grain, a little domestic magic that no one here would bother to name. Heading back toward the bakery, you pass through the small marketplace. The pottery stall now displays oil jars painted with lotus and papyrus designs. You overhear someone haggling for cinnamon sticks brought from far-off lands, and for a moment, you remember how interconnected this world is, how a loaf of bread here might carry a scent that began thousands of miles away. When you arrive back at the bakery, the cat is gone, perhaps off on important cat business. The baker greets you with another fresh round, this one cooler. Baked earlier, but still carrying the subtle whisper of rose from the oil. You take a bite, and the flavor is quieter now, the way light softens before evening. Somewhere in the distance, a drum beats once, twice a signal for something you don't yet understand. But here, in this little corner of Egypt, the day is winding down in no rush at all. You lean back against the wall, let the hum of the village wrap around you, and think that maybe tomorrow you'll ask the baker to teach you the recipe, though you suspect it's the kind of secret that stays with the family. Evening in the village is a slow curtain, drawn one thread at a time. The sun has lowered itself into the river's edge, turning the Nile into a broad strip of molten copper. Long shadows stretch across the bakery's doorway, and the air cools, just enough to feel like the day has forgiven you for surviving it. Inside, the oven's glow is softer now, its heat lingering like the memory of a long conversation. The baker sits on a low stool, a clay cup in his hand, and the apprentice sweeps flour into neat piles with a reed brush. You realize that the dear scent of bread hasn't faded. It's simply become part of the background, like the river or the sound of sandals scuffing the dust outside. A group of neighbors stop by, not so much to buy bread as to talk. They sit on overturned baskets, swapping news about a caravan delayed by sandstorms, a birth in the next village, and the mysterious disappearance of someone's goat, though. The way they all glance at each other makes you suspect the goat has simply decided to live elsewhere. You offer no opinion. You are but a visitor in goat politics, the baker tells you, between sips, that tomorrow will be a good baking day because the wind will shift and the air will be drier. You nod, though you have no idea how he knows this. Perhaps it's the same instinct that tells him when dough has been kneaded enough. Historians still debate how ancient tradespeople passed down their craft through formal apprenticeship or simply through years of watching, touching, and smelling until the knowledge lived in the body. A young woman enters with a small basket covered in linen. She uncovers it to reveal 2 small loaves, baked at home but lacking the perfume touch. She asks the baker if she can brush them with his oil mixture, and he obliges, dipping a soft reed brush into a bowl of coriander and sweet rush. He paints the surface delicately, as though the bread itself is a guest. Outside, the first stars are visible, faint and hesitant. You step into the street, and the coolness feels like silk after the day's heat. Somewhere nearby, a musician plucks a short, repetitive melody on a lyre. It's not a performance, just something to pass the time before night takes over. You return to your stone seat by the doorway, the cat now back in place, as if to reassert ownership. It gives you the slow blink of approval, and you know you've passed some small feline test. By nightfall, the village changes pace entirely. The marketplace is packed away, the pottery covered, and the air fills with the soft flicker of oil lamps. The bakery's oven has been closed for the day, but the heat still radiates from its clay walls, turning the small room into a pocket of comfort against the cool air outside. The baker offers you a final taste, a thin slice from a loaf baked earlier, drizzled with honey and sprinkled with crushed cumin. The flavor is deeper, darker than the morning's bread, as though the day itself has settled into it. You take your time chewing, because this isn't just food. It's the last note in the day's song. In the corner, 2 older men play a game involving small stones and a wooden board with carved depressions. They argue lightly about the rules, though you suspect both of them know exactly how to play. The baker chuckles and tells you they've been having the same argument for 20 years. Historians might call it a form of Senate, but here it's simply the game. A boy comes in carrying a small jar of oil from the temple storehouse. He explains that tomorrow's loaves for the priests will be brushed with this mixture infused with safflower and frankincense. The smell, he says, makes the gods happy. Whether or not that's true, you imagine it would make the priests quite happy, at least. You think back to the first bite you had this morning, and it strikes you that perfumed bread is more than just a curiosity. It's a thread tying together the sacred and the ordinary, the morning market and the temple altar, the fisherman's breakfast and the scribe's festival gift. Outside, the wind carries a hint of river mist. You follow it a short way toward the water, passing houses where people sit in doorways, talking in low voices. The air is cooler now, tinged with the smell of reed mats drying by the riverbank. Somewhere in the distance, a night bird calls, its sound echoing just enough to make the narrow streets feel larger. When you return to the bakery, the door is half closed, but the baker waves you in. He places one last roll in your hands, a simple, unperfumed one this time. For the road, he says, though you're not sure where your road leads. You sit a while longer on your stone seat, watching the lamps flicker against the clay walls. The cat, tired from its day's supervisory duties, curls up beside you. In the soft warmth of the oven's fading heat, you realize you've stopped keeping track of time entirely. Here, there's only the rhythm of bread, the scent of oil, and the quiet certainty that tomorrow will smell just as sweet. Morning again, though the light feels different, paler, as if the sun is stretching slowly into its duties. You wake to the faint clink of pottery and the muffled sound of footsteps on packed earth. The village is stirring in that unhurried way you've come to expect, like someone quietly unpacking a suitcase they have all year to open. You wander to the bakery without thinking, your feet already knowing the path. The cat is waiting, stretched across your usual seat as if to say, well, you took your time. Inside, the baker is already deep into his work, kneading dough while his apprentice grinds fresh coriander seeds. The scent is sharper this morning, green and bright, and it blends with the warm, yeasty smell of rising bread. The baker glances up and tells you today's loaves will have a touch of marjoram in the oil. He says it's for the nerves, which makes you wonder whether the whole village has been collectively anxious about something, or if this is simply his version of a spa day. Historians still debate the extent to which herbs in ancient bread were chosen for medicinal purposes versus purely for taste, though here it seems both are equally valid. As you settle into your spot, you watch a woman arrive carrying a jar wrapped in cloth. She explains that it holds precious imported cinnamon, a gift from her brother who works in a port city far to the north. The baker treats the jar like treasure, sprinkling a pinch into the oil and inhaling deeply before stirring it in. You can't help but notice the way everyone watches this, how something so small can command such reverence. A group of children run past the doorway, chasing each other and leaving dusty footprints in their wake. One pauses just long enough to peek inside, probably to see if any stray loaves are cooling unattended. You make a mental note that bread theft might be the village's most common childhood crime. The air in the bakery is warmer now, the scent thick and almost tangible. You realize how easily time passes here. You came in to just watch for a few minutes, and now the first loaves are being pulled from the oven. They gleam faintly from the brushed oil, the coriander seeds forming tiny constellations on the surface. You take one, the heat seeping into your palms, and wonder how something so simple, grain, water, oil, time, can taste like a whole place in season in a single bite. The day ahead feels heavier, the sky holding a pale haze that softens the edges of everything. The baker says it's a good day for slower baking, that the dough will rise without rushing. You nod as if you've always known this truth, though you suspect it's one of those bits of knowledge that only reveals itself after decades of listening to bread. A merchant stops by carrying a bundle wrapped in woven palm leaves. He unwraps it to reveal small clay jars, frankincense resin from trade routes that went far beyond the deserts. This, he says, is for a special order from the temple, loaves scented so richly they'll perfume the air for hours after the offering is burned. The baker examines the resin, turning each piece in his hand like a gem cutter. You think about the absurd beauty of it, turning tree sap into fragrance, then fragrance into bread, then bread into smoke. Historians still wonder whether such extravagant breads were eaten after ceremonies or entirely consumed by fire. Here, the answer seems to be, it depends who's hungry. Later, you wander to the riverbank, carrying a small piece of bread from the morning's batch. The water moves lazily, as if it knows it has the monopoly on travel here. A fisherman repairs his net nearby, humming a tune that drifts easily over the water. You sit on a smooth stone, letting the sun warm your back, and think about how the same river that feeds the grain fields also carries cinnamon, frankincense, and lotus oil from far-off lands. Returning to the village, you pass the pottery shop. Again, today they're making shallow dishes, each decorated with a simple reed pattern. The potter explains they're for storing the scented oils in smaller portions to keep them fresher. You wonder whether he knows he's making the equivalent of ancient Tupperware, though his version won't be found in a forgotten kitchen cupboard. When you arrive at the bakery, the frankincense loaves are already baking. The scent is unlike anything else, deep, resinous, with a faint citrus edge. It fills the street, and you notice people slowing their steps as they pass, just to breathe it in. The baker offers you a sliver, still warm, and the taste is almost ceremonial. You eat it slowly, not because you have to, but because something in it makes you feel you should. The cat, now your silent dinner companion, sits beside you watching the street, perhaps wondering how a loaf could smell this good without being fished at by late afternoon. The air has thickened into a quiet haze, as if the whole village is holding its breath before the cool of evening. The bakery door is propped open, not so much for customers as for the breeze, though breeze is generous. It's more of a polite nudge from the river. You sit in your usual place, and the cat arrives moments later, clearly having timed its entrance for maximum dramatic effect. Inside, the baker is bent over a shallow clay dish, mixing oil with something. That looks like powdered petals. He tells you it's blue lotus, rare and treasured, brought in by a trader who only visits once a year. The oil shimmers faintly, and when he opens the jar fully, the scent seems to step into the room ahead of itself, soft, floral, with a sweetness that feels almost like music. He dips a brush in and begins painting it over small, round loaves, destined for the temple. The apprentice leans in to watch, his expression somewhere between awe and hunger. You realize this is as much performance as preparation, every motion deliberate, as though the bread might be offended by clumsy handling. A neighbor stops by to collect an order and lingers in the doorway, sniffing the air. She swears that bread, brushed with blue lotus oil, will bring vivid dreams if eaten before bed. Historians still debate whether this was a widely held belief or simply the kind of story people enjoy passing along when they want to make a meal feel like magic. Outside, the street carries on in its slow rhythm, someone walking with a bundle of reeds, a boy chasing a runaway chicken, two old friends leaning on each other's shoulders while laughing at a private joke. The smell of the lotus bread drifts beyond. The bakery, trailing into their conversations as if it too has something to say. The baker hands you a loaf, not one for the temple, but one for you. You break it open, and the scent rushes upward like a warm breeze from another season entirely. You take a bite, and it's as though the taste hangs in the air for a moment before landing on your tongue. Somewhere behind you, the river glints in the low sun, and you think, this is what patience tastes like. Night comes slowly, folding itself over the village in long, loose layers. The marketplace has gone quiet, and the only sounds are the muted thump of a pestle from somewhere down the street and the soft plink of water in a jar as someone fills it from the communal well. Inside the bakery, the oven is nearly dark, though the clay still hums with stored heat. The baker and his apprentice sit on the floor, sharing a simple meal bread, olives, and a little goat cheese. They wave you over without ceremony, sliding a small plate your way. You take a piece of bread, still faintly warm from earlier, and it carries the delicate ghost of the lotus scent from the afternoon. Man you haven't seen before steps into the doorway. He's tall, wrapped in a linen robe dyed a deep brown, and he carries a woven basket covered with palm fronds. When he lifts the cover, the bakery fills with the sharp, green scent of fresh herbs, basil, dill, and a sprig of something the baker calls desert mint. The man says he's come from upriver and heard of this place's oils. He wants to trade his herbs for a lesson in perfumed bread. The baker smiles, but shakes his head. The lesson, he says, is not in the recipe. It's in the hands. The man laughs, accepts the refusal, and stays to eat a piece of bread anyway, Historians still debate whether baking in ancient Egypt was guarded knowledge or freely shared among professionals. From the look in the baker's eyes, you'd guess it's something more personal, a craft taught only when the time feels right. The night deepens. Oil lamps flicker, throwing the bakery's shadows in strange, gentle shapes across the wall. Outside, a soft wind stirs, carrying the distant sound of someone singing a low, lilting melody that sounds almost like a lullaby. You lean back, feeling the clay wall warm against your shoulders, the scent of bread in the air, the quiet murmur of voices around you. You could walk back to wherever you're sleeping, but it's easier to stay here, letting the night settle over you like another layer of linen. Morning returns without ceremony. No grand sunrise over the desert, no chorus of temple bells, just the soft scrape of a broom against the bakery's clay floor and the faint scent of yeast beginning to wake. You open your eyes to find the baker already at work, his apprentice still rubbing sleep from his face, holding a jar of honey like it might explain why he's awake this early. The baker nods at you, then gestures toward a table where a shallow bowl of oil rests, this time not floral but sharp and resinous. He explains it's infused with myrrh, usually reserved for temple offerings, but today they're experimenting because even gods appreciate novelty. You notice a hint of sarcasm under his voice, the kind that sounds harmless but might have once gotten him in trouble with a priest. As the loaves bake, the scent is unlike anything you've smelled before, woody, slightly bitter, but warming, in a way that feels expensive. The baker chuckles when you say so. That's because it is expensive, he says, sprinkling a few grains of ground coriander over the top, like he's tossing secrets into the oven. Through the open door, you see a scribe pass by, his reed pen tucked into his belt like a knife. He glances in, catches the smell, and steps inside without invitation. He wants a loaf for the temple archives, not for eating, but for scenting the papyrus room. Apparently, certain perfumes help keep insects away from stored scrolls. Historians still debate whether this was truly effective or just another clever way to justify stealing bakery stock. The apprentice wraps the loaf in a reed mat and sends the scribe on his way. You watch as the street swallows him up, the loaf's perfume trailing behind him like a ribbon. The baker leans on the counter, hands dusted in flour, and says, "Funny thing about bread, everyone thinks it's about eating, but most of the time it's about memory." By mid-morning, the street outside has started its daily hum, traders shouting greetings, a slap of sandals against packed earth, the occasional bray of a donkey who clearly disagrees with its workload. The air is warmer, brighter, but still soft with the lingering sense of early baking. The baker decides it's time to visit the miller. You walk with him, carrying a sack of last night's leftover loaves for trade. The mill is a low building. Near the edge of the village, its stones already turning in a slow, rhythmic grind. Inside, the air is thick with fine dust, coating your skin in a way that feels both annoying and strangely soothing. The miller greets the baker with the ease of someone who's been bartering with him for decades. He examines the loaves, sniffs them like he's reading a poem, and nods in approval. In exchange, he pours fresh ground emmer wheat into a jar, its warmth radiating through the clay. On the walk back, the baker tells you about a time the Nile flooded so high the mill had to be moved onto a barge for 2 whole months. Grinding grain on water, he says, is like trying to write a letter while riding a camel. You picture it a rocking platform, the grindstone turning with each swell, and you're not sure whether to admire the ingenuity or the stubbornness. Historians still debate whether this floating mill story is exaggerated. But you've been here long enough to know that in this village, exaggeration is as much a currency as wheat. Back at the bakery, the apprentice is waiting with a jar of sesame oil he's been infusing with rose petals. It's an untested idea, and when he opens it, the baker sniffs, raises an eyebrow, and says, "It smells like someone left dessert in a garden," which, depending on your taste, might be exactly the point. The oven flares to life again, the day stretching out ahead, full of scents that may linger in your memory far longer than the taste on your tongue. The sun tilts toward late afternoon, throwing long shadows that turn the street into a tapestry of gold and dust. The bakery, still warm from the morning's fires, hums in a quieter way now, the loud work done, the loaves cooling, the air thick with mingled scents of grain, oil, and faint perfume. You sit outside on a low bench, sipping a cup of date-sweetened water. Across the lane, a woman sells figs from a woven basket, her voice low, coaxing rather than calling. Children drift past, their bare feet making soft percussion against the earth. The baker joins you. Wiping his hands on his apron, he tells you that in some seasons they baked bread with tiny drops of lotus essence, believed to calm the spirit and settle the heart. Not sure if it worked, he admits, but people swore they slept better. You wonder if this is why his loaves have such quiet power, not just food, but a small kindness disguised as something ordinary. A breeze shifts, carrying the scent of the river, a reminder that the Nile is never far from anything here, neither from the grain, nor the trade, nor the perfume that finds its way into the simplest loaf dot somewhere in the distance. A temple drum sounds once, low and slow, marking the turn of the day. The baker watches the light change on the wall opposite, then says, almost to himself, "Every loaf is a small ceremony." even if no one notices. You feel the air settle around you, the kind of stillness that doesn't demand attention. It just waits and holds Dot. And now, as the day folds itself away, we can let our steps slow. Let the heat of the oven fade into the soft warmth of evening. Let the scents blur into the air, unhurried, like stories half remembered. The street grows quieter, the sky deepening to the blue of old ink. You let your breath follow the rhythm of the baker's steady, untroubled. The dust in the air becomes golden in the fading light, and even the far-off sounds grow muffled like voices through linen. Somewhere in the bakery, the last loaf cools. Somewhere by the river, water folds and unfolds against the shore. You remain here on this bench, in this hour that has no rush. Dot, and as your eyes close, you carry with you the gentle truth of the day, that even in the busiest world, some things are still allowed to rise slowly.